Every MMORPG in existence has an Achilles heel. The one aspect that can make even the best designed game essentially unplayable. Imagine you're playing a new MMO. You're having a great time running around, killing the stuff, and getting the loots. But then, you try to use an ability and nothing happens. You type a message in chat and no one responds. Then, a few moments later, you see what makes MMORPGs really special is their ability to bring together lots of people from all around the real world to interact in a shared virtual world. And networking is the glue that binds that all together. I'm not talking about handing out your business card at a conference. I'm talking about the actual nuts and bolts of how when I do something on my computer, it shows up on your computer in real time. To most MMO players, it seems like sorcery. Networking is the sort of thing you probably don't even think about until it's not working. And when that happens, it can be infuriating. There is a process behind networking, but it's quite complicated and it happens insanely fast, so it does kind of seem like magic. In this video, I'll attempt to demystify some of that. We'll then use that info to look at why Pantheon Rise of the Fallen's development has reached a crossroads and why networking is at the center of it. Before we get into that though, let's do a brief overview of how networking works in general, or else the rest of it might not make much sense. In this section, I'll explain clients and servers, the network stack and libraries, and crashes. Now, I'm not a networking expert, so I consulted with Bitcruns, the programmer behind the Librarian of Pantheon Discord bot, to get some help putting this into words in a way that is both simple and accurate. Let's start with a couple words you've probably heard before if you've played MMOs. Clients and servers. When you're playing an MMO, your computer is running a client. And for the purposes of this discussion, the main thing you need to know about the client is that it tracks your inputs, like from your mouse and keyboard, and also tells your computer when it should display each model, special effect, audio, and all the other files that you've installed for that game. Now, not all MMO clients are the same, but for now, I'm just going to talk about what are known as dumb clients, because that's what Pantheon uses. And dumb clients are dumb because the only way they can know when to display those models, special effects, etc., is by taking your inputs and sending them to a server. And in turn, the server tells your client what it should do. Server can be somewhat of a confusing term because it can refer both to a type of software and the computer that's running that software. So the best way to think about a server is it's the role that a computer has when running that server software. Any computer can be a server, but when that server has to process lots and lots of incoming data every second from hundreds or thousands of players nonstop 24/7, it's usually not a computer like you have at home. Highly powerful and specialized computers are built for this purpose. In the case of Pantheon, Visionary Realms uses cloud servers, specifically Amazon Web Services or AWS cloud servers. The cloud is another term we hear that kind of sounds like sorcery, but really all it means is that Visionary Realms is renting out some number of those highly powerful and specialized server machines located in a warehouse owned by Amazon somewhere. A server admin at Visionary Realms can then log into AWS's portal from their own computer to access their server machine and install their server software on it remotely. This is much more cost effective than what was common in the old days of MMOs, where you had to actually buy and maintain your own server machines. With cloud servers, Visionary Realms can also rent additional machines in a matter of minutes if needed. And because Amazon server warehouses are located all around the world, those machines can be in almost any region the developers need based on where their players are. You'll see why that's important later when we talk about how clients will connect to it. Anyway, the server software is what takes players' input, authenticates it, and performs all necessary calculations like damage, physics, etc. The server will also send or retrieve info to or from a database, which is either on that same machine or on a separate machine nearby. This happens when a client requests to know things that are persistent, like what items a merchant currently has for sale. Once that's all done, the server will then broadcast the results to all the clients who need it. The client then simply takes those results and displays them on your screen. Again, this is not necessarily the case for all MMOs, but it is for a lot of them, including Pantheon. In the October 2021 Pantheon newsletter, lead programmer Kyle Olson said, quote, "We currently force all actions to be performed server-side only, with the exception of client movement. This means that the client can only ask the server for permission to do some action. Client movement is validated heuristically on the server side, and accounts are flagged for possible speed or teleport hacks," end quote. Giving the server final authority mitigates player cheating because, for example, if your client was able to calculate how much damage you do when you attack, there wouldn't really be anything stopping you from modifying the files on your computer to have your client tell the server that you critically hit 100% of the time. And the server wouldn't question it. That would just be what happens. But here, the server is running the show. It might be helpful to think of these interactions like a really fast-paced and strict game of tabletop D&D with many, many players. The Dungeon Master, with all the rule books and manuals, is the server, and the players are the clients. The clients ask the server if they can do something like cast a spell. The server then determines if it's a legal move, determines the result according to the rules, and tells the clients what happened. In an ideal setting, all of the clients will get that update as to what happened simultaneously, or as close to simultaneously as possible. It always takes some amount of time, and I'll tell you why, because, again, it doesn't just happen magically. There's always a specific set of instructions for how the clients and servers communicate with each other, and that is where we find the network stack. It's basically the code that governs the process by which data is signed, sealed, and delivered, and then also received, unpackaged, and read for both the server and the client. To understand this better, I'd like to introduce you to the OSI model, or Open Systems Interconnection Model. This is a diagram to represent the process by which data is transferred from one computer to another via the internet. It's more conceptual than literal, and I'm not going to get into all the details of each step, but it should give us a better idea of what's going on with Pantheon's development. As you can see, the diagram is divided into layers that are stacked on top of each other, which is where we get the term stack from. Let's start at the top. When you're playing an MMO, you're interacting with an application. And when you provide any input that the server needs to know about, like pressing a key on your keyboard to use an ability, that data signal is sent from the application layer to the presentation layer, where it is arranged into a format that the receiving application will be able to understand. It's then ready for the session layer, which manages the continuous flow of data to and from the destination for that session. While we're here, I want to mention one more term you'll need to know about when we talk more specifically about Pantheon later. A library. No, not the library of Pantheon. A library in the programming world is a collection of code that a program can reference to perform certain tasks. In the case of a network library, those tasks have to do with the smooth transfer of different types of data to and from a server. It's effectively here at the session layer. Some network libraries can technically do things at the above layers too, but again, this is a concept, not a rule. So for the purposes of this simple discussion, let's think of a network library being mainly at the session layer. And here it acts as the all-important last stop before data is sent to the transport layer and the first stop when data is received from it. If our data is continuing down the stack though, the next step, as I said, is the transport layer, where the data is delivered through one of two primary types of sockets, TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, or UDP, User Datagram Protocol. TCP provides a sort of insurance that the data will reach its destination completely and in the right order. It does this by first establishing a handshake with the receiving device. Whether you realize it or not, you probably do this at the beginning of every Discord, Skype, or Zoom call. Maybe this will sound familiar. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. That is essentially the transmission control protocol. The sender and receiver will perform that before transmitting data. The upside is that if for some reason the data isn't received, the sender will know and can resend it to ensure that nothing is lost. The downside is that it takes additional time to establish that handshake. UDP, on the other hand, does not have this handshake and instead just sends the data immediately. The upside of this is that, of course, it is much faster, but the downside is that if the data is lost in transit for some reason, it can't be resent. Like most online games, Pantheon uses UDP because it allows large volumes of data to be constantly blasted through that socket, and the downside of losing some data here and there can be accommodated. After the transport layer, the data hits the road. Just as a quick overview, the bundle of data, now called a packet, passes through a series of routers and switches before being sent out as either electromagnetic waves or along a physical cable. It then takes its journey through the real world to your internet service provider and onto wherever its destination is. In this case, a certain server machine in a warehouse somewhere. Remember how I said that one of the benefits of cloud servers is that Vision Realms can have a server in almost any region of the world? Well, this is why your computer's geographical distance from the server it's connected to makes a difference. It takes time for that packet to physically travel the distance. It might only be a fraction of a second, but the longer it is, the more likely it is to be noticeable. When the packet arrives at its physical destination, it goes through the same layers of the OSI model, but in reverse. Once it reaches the top, the server in this case will determine the correct response and send that response back to your client using the same process over again. This process is used to carry tons of different types of information and is repeated many, many times every second for every client. The total amount of time it takes for a data signal to complete a one-way trip from client to server or vice versa is called latency. Usually latency is so fast that it's unnoticeable, but when factors along the route make it slow enough to become noticeable, we call that lag. I don't know, maybe you've heard of it? And sometimes, like when too many clients are connected to a server, the server will get completely overwhelmed by all the incoming and outgoing traffic, resulting in a crash. And when this happens, the server loses contact with the clients. But this doesn't just happen randomly. Crashes are almost never caused by the bottom 4 layers of the OSI model, which are the hardware, like switches, cables, etc. Crashes are caused by the top 3 layers, which are the lines of code written by programmers. So whenever you hear the term network stack, we're specifically talking about these top 3 layers because that's what the game developers have control over. Crashes happen when the software is not designed in a way that can efficiently receive, process, and deliver that much data traffic. For example, think of a traffic director at a busy intersection who isn't very good at his job and causes a major pileup that forces the road to be closed down temporarily. And that right there, my friends, is one of the main reasons why all of you who have pledged to get access to Pantheon's alpha testing still haven't gotten that invitation. I asked lead programmer Kyle Olson about Pantheon's current network library recently, and he said, quote, "Our current library was made for Unity 2.6 over a decade ago and intended for small player counts," end quote. In 2018, Vision Realms stated that there were about 800 pre-alpha testers at the time, so I'll conservatively estimate that by now there's somewhere between 1 and 2,000. I'm confident with that estimate because if you've pledged to Pantheon, you can join the official Pantheon Discord server. In addition to just being a fun place to hang out, everyone there is labeled by their pledge level, and it's actually a pretty decent tool for gauging how much the community is growing. Of course, not everyone uses Discord, but I can see that there are still new VIPs joining the server almost every day, and there are also some who have pre-alpha access from their Kickstarter pledges. So looking around there, it's safe to say that there are currently between 1 and 2,000 total pre-alpha testers. During a test session, those testers are split up across multiple servers, and sometimes each server is further split up into multiple time slots. So each tester can only log into their assigned server and only during their selected time slot. When you factor in that not everyone may play every session, you can see how the load of network traffic from those testers is spread out enough to a point where their current network library can handle it. Or at least, usually. Even with those smaller amounts of testers online at a given time, the devs have admitted to some sessions that have been spoiled by frequent server crashes.
So there's a few issues around the last PA testing. So the guys are working incredibly hard around the clock to fix things on the fly. There was a bit of delay,
and already in pre-alpha testing, we can run into stability issues at times with our current networking stack when we have zones that reach a certain population.
And those are just the times they've mentioned it publicly. As of January 2021, there were at least 8,000 people signed up for alpha testing. If you take into account the people who have signed up for alpha since then, plus the many people who will inevitably sign up for alpha once they hear a confirmed date for when it will start, we're easily talking over 10,000 alpha testers. If the current network library is barely keeping it together with roughly 1,000 testers, you can imagine what it would be like with about 10 times that much traffic. If Pantheon's alpha testing started at any time with the current network library, it would be a complete train wreck, guaranteed. Even if everything else about the game is great, server crashes would be unavoidable and ruin the experience. So, what Visionary Realms needs to do, and has been preparing to do for the past couple years or so, is to rip out that decade-old small player count network library and replace it with a new one that can easily handle the immense traffic of a full-scale MMORPG. But to do that, they also need to make sure that all the code in the layers above it knows how to properly use that new library. You may be wondering why Visionary Realms would implement a network library intended for small player counts in the first place, when their intention has always been to make a full-scale MMORPG. And the short answer is that there just aren't any accessible pre-built network libraries for the Unity game engine that work for full-scale MMO player counts. Remember that historically, MMORPGs haven't usually been made with Unity. Yes, there are a few, but none with as big of a scope as Pantheon. And by scope, I don't just mean the amount of expected players, but also the amount of actions in the game that require data to be sent over the network. So really, Visionary Realms' only option then is to build a network library themselves that will suit their needs. I've oversimplified the OSI model in this video, but the reality is that constructing a network architecture that can effectively synchronize the data traffic of a truly massive amount of players requires a very particular set of skills. In fact, it's probably one of the most specialized aspects of MMO development. For most bigger studios, if there's not already a pre-built network library that will suit their needs, they can find someone who has that expertise and pay them probably a lot of money to build what they need. But that's not such a given when you have the limited budget of a crowdfunded project like Pantheon. So, Visionary Realms went without that skill set until late 2019, when they hired Kyle Olsen. Kyle has been developing with the Unity engine since its launch 17 years ago, and networking is his specialty. Before Kyle even joined Visionary Realms, he spent his free time laying the groundwork for a network library that can handle the traffic of very large player populations, specifically in games that run on the Unity engine. That library is now known as ViNL, the Visionary Realms Incorporated Network Library. Now, I don't know what happened to the R in that acronym, but I guess ViNL just doesn't have the same ring to it.
A UDP socket library with a focus on performance in Unity's game engine. So it's not meant to be used outside of Unity in Unreal or in a .NET application. It's specifically built with Unity in mind, meaning that we can leverage lots of their internal features, namely burst compiler, we talked about so much, the job system, things like addressables, other packages and features in Unity that they ship, we want to be able to leverage, meaning we built a specific socket library for the engine, which in and of itself, there aren't that many of. Most people want to build a nice, generic, reusable thing that can be used everywhere. Not us. We have very specific performance targets that we're trying to hit in our game engine. That was the main driving force behind it. Just feature lists, we have lots of code generation features for simple serialization and deserialization. So turning data into bytes that can be sent over the network, and then receiving those bytes and turning that back into a representation of the data. We have code generation that will help with that. Things like network aware objects, so you can send a message to a specific thing and not to just everybody connected. Little interest management helpers, basically, assistants in Unity itself that makes it easier to develop video games in the engine. That's sort of the driving force behind it.
There's quite a few technical terms in there, but I want to hone in on Unity's job system that he mentioned, because it's at the heart of what ViNL is. And what makes the job system so important is that it utilizes multi-threading. All of the data your computer needs to run a game like Pantheon must pass through its central processing unit, or CPU. This is essentially the brain of the computer. And almost every modern-day CPU is made up of multiple cores, each of which have 2 threads. And threads allow the CPU to multitask by processing multiple streams of data simultaneously. For the sake of example, an Intel i7-8700 processor has 6 cores or 12 threads, and you can think of these 12 threads like a 12-lane highway. Imagine any data that has to do with presenting graphics on your screen as being carried by a tractor-trailer truck on that CPU highway. These are the heavy lifters, but travel relatively slowly. Also imagine that any data that has to do with network packets as being carried by a car, which are smaller and faster. Tractor trailers by nature must travel in the rightmost lane or thread, called the main thread. In the main thread, tractor trailers are trying to constantly send data to your screen, which you see as graphics. The speed at which this happens is called your frame rate. Cars, on the other hand, can travel in any lane. When a network library is handling a packet, it sends that data in a car to one of these 12 lanes for processing. If it merges into the main thread, the tractor trailers must make room for it to let it in. This results in your screen getting updated with data less frequently, and your frame rate goes down. This is how Pantheon's decade-old network library works. Anytime it receives a packet, it always sends it to that main thread. This means that when there are a lot of incoming packets, as there often are, the main thread gets backed up, tractor trailers can't reach your screen as quickly, and you get that annoying, choppy performance. The key to what ViNL does is it arranges those packets off of the main thread, allowing your CPU to process more things at once. The network packets in cars don't interfere with the tractor trailers that put graphics on your screen. You in turn get a nice high frame rate and smooth, buttery performance. And that, in a nutshell, is multi-threading. As I previously said, a network library is just a collection of code, and as such, it can often be copied and reused in other similar programs as long as the rest of that program knows how to interact with it. I also mentioned that there are essentially no Unity-specific network libraries already out there that are built to handle large player numbers. Because ViNL is so unique and so good at what it does, outside studios that also use the Unity engine have already purchased licenses to use ViNL.
Iterating on both the performance, the usability, the scalability of the library itself doesn't have specific ties to Pantheon as a game. The networking is fully decoupled from what Pantheon is and can be used in other video games. So like we mentioned, we've licensed it out to other companies already. That means that the library itself is a piece of technology that can be iterated on independently from Pantheon.
Which, by the way, is another nice way for VR to generate some additional funding for developing Pantheon. Although Kyle went on to say that ViNL is currently only licensed to a few select studios, so as not to take away from Pantheon's development time by having to provide support to lots of other studios. It might seem odd that outside studios would be interested in ViNL when Pantheon still hasn't actually supported a massive amount of players. But as a standalone collection of code, ViNL can be tested in a simulation with any number of clients run by bots that are programmed to create network traffic like a real player would. It doesn't need all the textures, animations, lighting, etc. because those things are rendered on your computer and don't affect ViNL's performance. As far as ViNL is concerned, an MMO essentially looks like what you're seeing here. These tests show that ViNL can process network traffic at rates far higher than you would typically see in a live MMORPG scenario, and without even breaking a sweat. Just to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see these huge boundary-pushing battlefields with hundreds or thousands of characters on screen at a time in Pantheon. Even though that might be possible if they wanted to, the bottom line here is that ViNL gives Visionary Realms the flexibility they need to choose the right population cap for their servers, and at the same time saves them a lot of money in monthly overhead costs by needing less servers or less powerful servers to hit their target numbers. Anyway, you might be wondering, as I did, if replacing the old network library is so important and the new network library is already built, why hasn't implementing it been the top priority? Well, it's not a simple case of plug and play. Hopefully throughout this video, you've gathered that there are many aspects of the overall game that interact with the network library, and every single one of them needs to be plugged in to the library properly. This takes time, and developer time needs to be planned efficiently because Visionary Realms' programming team consists mainly of 2 people. The team page lists 3, but as far as I can tell, Todd Curtis contributes only on a case-by-case basis and isn't heavily involved in the project anymore. Anyway, Kyle will be swapping out the network library himself because it's his brainchild, and replacing a network library is kind of like heart transplant surgery. Once you start, you can't just put it on pause if something else comes up. So as soon as Kyle takes out the old network library and starts to put in the new one, that needs to be his sole focus until it's done, which he estimates will take about 2 months. So during that time, literally half of the programming team will be occupied, which means everyone else needs to have things that they can work on independently until he's done. Fans of Pantheon have already waited a long time for Alpha, so the team can't afford to have the other departments put completely on hold for months if they need Kyle to do something for them. In the dark ages of Pantheon's development, aka pretty much everything before the beginning of 2020, that's exactly what would have happened. Even if they did somehow already have the network library they needed, they wouldn't have been able to afford having a programmer spend months integrating it. That's because until 2020, the vast majority of the game was hard-coded. In other words, anytime the designers wanted a new ability or disposition or perception ping added to the game, they'd have to send that design to a programmer who would then manually code it into the game. The rate at which new content could be added to the game was throttled by their small programming team. But since the team was restructured at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, with Chris Perkins now as the creative and programming producer and Kyle as the lead programmer, they've been focusing on removing that rigid, messy hard coding and creating a whole toolbox that the designers can use to add that content to the game themselves, like abilities, dispositions, traits, quests, perception storylines, items, crafting recipes, etc., all without actually writing any code. Now listen up, because this quote is a longer one, but it's key to understanding what happened at this pivotal moment in Pantheon's history. Kyle explained in the October 2021 newsletter, quote, "When I joined Visionary Realms, Project Fairthale was in full swing. I was immediately tasked with implementing some of the Sleepless Boss abilities while I learned the codebase better. It was immediately obvious that there was a lot of technical debt built up over the years due to focusing heavily on delivering milestones instead of keeping a clean code base that was lean and easy to work with. There was also a lack of designer-focused tools in some areas, or the tools we had simply didn't function properly. I took it upon myself to deal with what I thought was the most obvious problem, and that was the current character controller we had. I gave a small demo one week of the updates, and that got the ball rolling on our large refactoring process that we were somewhat public about. That refactor ended up being a pretty significant success and allowed us to explore climbing in a much more real way. From there, we continued identifying the biggest areas of technical debt, or areas that the designers had limited or no control over for refactoring, end quote. The good news is that while Kyle and senior programmer Robert Crane were rewriting the game's codebase and creating those design tools over the past 2 years, they also were rewriting the network stack so that it would eventually be able to interact cleanly with ViNL, or really any other network library if needed in the future.
Code can be like really tightly coupled together sometimes, where if you change one thing, it sort of breaks other stuff. What I'm attempting to do is pull apart the code that governs the network from the part that governs the gameplay. And so they don't have direct dependencies upon each other. So in that sense, I'm sort of refactoring the networking as we go, but I'm leaving the network in place as it is, so that once it's been decoupled from the underlying layer, you can sort of pull the rug out from under it and replace it with the other thing really quick. And that's the idea. So it's a long process. That 2-month window that we've arrived at now is after a lot of that refactoring work has been done already on top of that underlying network layer.
If that doesn't make sense, here's one last car analogy for you. Although instead of the car being data, think of the car being Pantheon as a whole game. A network library is kind of like the transmission of that car. A transmission transmits the power from the engine to the wheels to make the car move. Transmissions are very complicated. Your average mechanic probably can't build one from scratch themselves, or at least not a good one. But your car needs the transmission to work. Even if you've got a powerful engine, your car is not going anywhere without a solid transmission. Visionary Realms has a super fancy 10-speed automatic transmission named ViNL, already built, that's sitting in their garage. Kyle made it himself because he's just spent most of his life doing that sort of thing. A transmission is its own object. It can be picked up and moved around and tested. Kyle's transmission is state-of-the-art, but it needs to be actually hooked up to a car to really shine. However, because a car's transmission needs to be properly hooked up to so many other parts and cables in the car, it's not as simple as just popping it in and expecting it to work. The rest of that car has to be properly equipped to receive that type of transmission, and that takes work. When Kyle joined the team in 2019, the Pantheon car was in pretty rough shape. The Unity engine itself is great, but everything that had been built around it was more or less cobbled together, and it just wouldn't work with Kyle's new, much more efficient transmission. Plus, the transmission it had at the time was basically rusted shut. It couldn't be taken out without breaking something else. So, Kyle and Rob have spent most of the past 2 years rebuilding the whole car from the ground up, so that not only is it a more solidly built car, but it will also be able to receive this fancy transmission that's standing by. Now, they've finally reached a point where ViNL is ready for the network stack is ready for ViNL, and the rest of the team can continue to work at their own pace while Kyle starts shifting his attention to actually integrating it. This is the last major hurdle that Visionary Realms needs to get over on their road to alpha. It's definitely not the last hurdle, but it's the last significant technological barrier. Perhaps you saw what's left on the alpha tracker on www.librarypantheon.com, and you feel like they've barely made a dent. It's easy to look at it that way, but the reality is that each of the remaining tasks aren't as monumental as the things that are done or almost done, like the asset and terrain streaming, the new network stack, etc. And several of the remaining tasks, like the pet system and classes, for example, are waiting on ViNL being in place first.
What it comes down to, technically speaking, is it's a throughput issue. It's a sheer throughput issue. Our current networking bottlenecks limit us from being able to successfully bring a pet system online to the extent that it needs to be, to where the experience is right, to where, put it this way, just completely transparent. If we brought the pet system online right now, not only would it have to be to some extent rewritten with the new networking stack in mind, but we would bring it online. And already in pre-alpha testing, we can run into stability issues at times with our current networking stack when we have zones that reach a certain population, areas that reach a certain population of concurrent players. Now, we bring the summoner online, for example, and all of a sudden, half of our current PA testers make a summoner at least, because it's a new class they want to try it out. And now all of a sudden we have at least 50% more entities on top of what is already causing stability issues, and it would be unfruitful. And when you add that to the fact that it needs to be kind of the system would need to be reappropriated for the new networking stack, then it's just a decision about when is the right time to do that. So the reason the Ranger's been lumped into that needs new networking group is because of the beckoning system, yes, but also because of the things that we want to do with the archery system in Pantheon and some of the cool stuff that we want to be able to do with projectiles and the things that I'll leave for a later time. But we simply need more fine detail control through our networking layer to create the kind of functionality and gameplay experience that we want for these classes, and we're waiting until we can do it right.
Don't expect to see much while Kyle is integrating ViNL, since all the work is under the hood and the game will hardly be functional while it's in surgery. But keep an eye on the alpha tracker once ViNL is in place and working, and you'll see how that will likely have a cascading effect on the rest of the to-do list getting to done. It's a watershed moment in the history of Pantheon's development. The game will finally, for the first time ever, have the proper infrastructure to be able to support thousands of concurrent players, and they'll be on the home stretch for opening the gates to alpha and beyond. If you don't want to be out of the loop about Pantheon's development moving forward, hit the subscribe button now, because this channel is dedicated to following it closely. Even if you think you've subscribed before, double check, because I've noticed YouTube has done some weird things by unsubscribing people for no reason. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know that I never ask you to donate to Pantheon's crowdfunded development. Everyone has different financial situations and levels of risk tolerance, so what you do with your money is up to you. However, if you do make that decision to pledge or upgrade your pledge, and my videos have in any way informed that decision, I'd appreciate it if you'd list me as a referral when you get your post-pledge survey. My account is BazgrimTV@gmail.com. That helps me to know that I'm covering the things that you want to know about. So, until the next video, stay curious and adventure on.